Welcome to the Kottke Ride Home for Monday, November 1st, 2021. I'm Jackson Bird. Today, a meditation on streaming entertainment, algorithms, and David Foster Wallace's prescient writing on the illusion of choice. Plus, a possible functional cure for HIV has just been approved to enter human trials, and the Wampanoag woman who grew heirloom corn on its original land for the first time in over 3 centuries. Here are some of the cool things from the news today. Writer Stuart Jeffries has a new book out called Everything All the Time Everywhere: How We Became Postmodern, and a new excerpt printed in Literary Hub today really got my wheels turning. It's about Netflix, the illusion of choice, and how David Foster Wallace foresaw it all. Jeffries explains how, in Wallace's encyclopedic novel Infinite Jest, Wallace imagines broadcast TV being replaced by Interlace Teleentertainment, a company from which, quote, cartridges could be bought or rented on demand and played on home cinema systems. The on-demand invited customers to suppose that they were controlling the supply and curating their entertainment. Wallace imagined the Interlace as an enormous gatekeeper, deciding what you would watch while seeming to offer viewers choice. He supposed the internet would evolve similarly. Because the information supply is in principle infinite, we demand some kind of digital gatekeeper to protect us from being overwhelmed. Wallace told an interviewer, "If you go back to Hobbes and why we ended up begging, why do people in a state of nature end up begging for a ruler who has the power of life and death over them? We absolutely have to give our power away. The internet is going to be exactly the same way. We're going to beg for it. We are literally going to pay for it." And continuing from Jeffries, what dies as a result is the utopian idea that the internet or digital culture in general is democratic. End quote. Well, that does kind of resonate right now. We could apply these ideas and vibes in a number of different ways, but sticking for now with Netflix, as Jeffries does in this article, he positions Netflix as the real-world equivalent of Wallace's Interlace Teleentertainment. Netflix dipped its toe in predictive analytics even before it started its Watch Now streaming feature, back when it was still just DVDs sent out to customers. Those DVDs started the change of the game. As Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos told Jeffries, people have always tried to fight against the schedulers, whether it was recording a show using their VCR, buying a DVD box set of a TV show, or later using a DVR. Netflix's, and for a hot minute Blockbuster's, DVD mailing service made the ability to watch what you want when you wanted even easier. You didn't have to drive to the video store. It seems inconvenient now to think that you only got one at a time and had to wait a few days for it, but back then it was pretty huge. And Netflix was already using their customers' ratings of shows and movies to predict choices for subscribers. But when that Watch Now streaming feature launched in 2007, it sent their predictive analytics out of whack. Quoting Jeffries, "In the old days of DVD rental, you added a movie to your queue because you wanted to watch it a few days later. There was a cost in your decision and a delayed reward. With instant streaming, you started playing something, you didn't like it, you just switch. Users don't really perceive the benefit of giving explicit feedback, so they invest less effort," says Netflix engineering director Xavier Amatrian. End quote. And this is kind of similar to when cable TV and home video really exploded. It used to be that you had to go to the movie theater to watch a movie, and that was a commitment. You had to pay for it, travel to the theater, and most of the time you stayed there for the duration of the film. When movies came to our home television sets, especially ones that played all the time on countless channels, TV execs felt pretty threatened. Their TV shows now had to compete with the very real possibility that someone who lost interest in the show would just switch to another channel, one playing a Hollywood blockbuster with a budget 10 times that of the TV show, and the special effects to reflect that. TV had to get a lot better. It had to become a lot more like movies. In a recorded conversation with Orson Welles from 1983, transcribed in Vulture and recently re-upped by Jason on Kottke.org by way of Laura Olin's newsletter, director Henry Jaglom brought up this same point. Jaglom, in 1983, said, quote, "Warren Beatty was just saying that TV has changed movies because for most of us, once you're in a movie theater, you commit, whether you like it or not. You want to see what they've done, while at home," end quote. But then, curiously, Welles said that if you're as old as him, it was actually the opposite. Quote, In my real movie-going days, which were the 30s, you didn't stand in line. You strolled down the street and sallied into the theater at any hour of the day or night, like you'd go in to have a drink at a bar. Every movie theater was partially empty, and we never asked what time the movie began. We used to go after we went to the theater. We'd leave when we realized, this is where I came in. Everybody said that. I loved movies for that reason. They didn't cost that much, so if you didn't like one, it was, let's go do something else, or go to another movie. And that's what made it habitual to such an extent that walking out of a movie was what for people now was like turning off the television set. End quote. Turning off, yes, but not quite changing the channel. What Wells describes is almost a combination of our current era of picking and choosing, joining for a little, leaving if we don't like it, and the traits that Wallace described of people who started watching TV regularly before 1970. Quote, they were trained to look where the TV pointed. End quote. In Orson Welles' days, moviegoers were seemingly more free with their choices about going to the cinema more casually, but they also had zero control over what was playing there, and very little choice compared to cinemas now, let alone cable TV or the entire world of streaming entertainment. But this choice that we think we have now, this seeking out of exactly what we want, it's overwhelmingly controlled by algorithms executing based on tiny metrics of our behavior and the behavior of others either in our close physical proximity or our digital filter bubble. And because we aren't as invested in what we choose, we self-report less, so companies step in to mine our data for how we really feel. Quoting Jeffries again, in the postmodern age, helped by technology, we dream of achieving 24/7 joy, but behind the joy are the algorithms. Let me just read that one more time because, holy cow. In the postmodern age, helped by technology, we dream of achieving 24/7 joy, but behind the joy are the algorithms. End quote. I just feel like that sums up so much about our world right now. But continuing on, quote, in 2012, for instance, when Sarandos commissioned a political drama for Netflix TV called House of Cards, predictive analytics helped justify his decision. It was generated by an algorithm, Sarandos told me. I didn't use data to make the show, but I used data to determine the potential audience to a level of accuracy very few people can do. End quote. And that level of accuracy comes from Netflix's knowledge of what its users played, searched for, and rated, including the time, date, and device that was all done on. Plus, Amatrian expounds, quote, we even track user interactions such as browsing or scrolling behavior. Most of our algorithms are based on the assumption that similar viewing patterns represent similar user tastes. We can use the behavior of similar users to infer your preferences. We've been working for some time on introducing context into recommendations. We have data that suggests there's different viewing behavior depending on the day of the week, the time of the day, the device, and sometimes even the location. But implementing contextual recommendations has practical challenges that we're currently working on, end quote. Now, none of this is necessarily new to anyone listening, but putting it in the context of Infinite Jest has my mind worrying a bit. You know, we think we have so much choice now, that we've broken free of the scheduling gatekeepers, but we've really just traded them for other ones, what Jeffrey calls, quote, a much more sophisticated group of gatekeepers whose task is to keep us watching while at the same time suggesting that viewers are being liberated by being given more choice, end quote. Again, something we've all been long aware of, but are feeling more and more strongly every day. Maybe I finally need to give Infinite Jest a crack. Back in August, Moderna announced it was beginning human trials for a vaccine for HIV using the same mRNA technology it's used for its COVID-19 vaccine, and now the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has approved another biotech company to begin human trials on their own HIV treatment. Excision Biotherapeutics treatment, called EBT-101, uses CRISPR gene editing technology to cut out several pieces of the HIV genome, rendering it incapable of mutating inside the body, theoretically. This would make it a functional cure, which Excision CEO Daniel Dornbush explained to Philadelphia Magazine as being, quote, an important distinction, as there will be no way to determine if EBT-101 will remove every viral genome from an individual, which is called a sterilizing cure. However, sterilizing cures are not necessary, as the goal of the therapy will be for individuals to remain HIV negative by RNA testing, maintain normal levels of immune cells, and cease taking antiretroviral treatment, achieving a functional cure. End quote. And that antiretroviral treatment, or ART, quoting the outlet Them, involves a combination of different HIV medications that decreases the amount of virus in the body and prevents it from attacking the immune system, per the National Institutes of Health. ART can even render a person's HIV infection undetectable while they're taking the medications, which makes it almost impossible for them to transmit the disease to someone else. While ART can significantly suppress HIV, it requires patients to stay on daily medications for life. They require lifelong treatment, cause side effects, and do not provide the possibility of a functional cure, Dornbush said in a press release. End quote. EBT 101, meanwhile, would be a one-time treatment. Excision, in partnership with Temple University, has already shown that their method of cutting out part of the HIV genome in non-human trials has been successful. Quoting again from Them, EBT 101 has already proved effective in removing HIV proviral DNA, a latent form of the virus that inserts itself into human cells and replicates along with them, from both lab-isolated human cells and non-human primates. According to Excision, these trials will include people who already have their HIV controlled using ART. Participants will receive one dose of EBT 101 and will subsequently remain on ART for 3 months, after which they will stop ART and be monitored for the return of the virus. The company will also be testing EBT 101 at various dose levels. End quote. Achieving a functional cure, perhaps around the same time that we also get a preventative vaccine from Moderna, could be world-changing stuff. The HIV/AIDS crisis is an ongoing epidemic that has killed over 36 million people worldwide since it began in 1981, and 680,000 people died of HIV-related illnesses just last year. And while HIV is most heavily concentrated in Africa, where 1 in every 25 adults lives with it, we did hit a stark milestone here in the States recently. According to new data from Johns Hopkins University, as the world passed 5 million deaths from COVID-19, here in the U.S., which Johns Hopkins describes as the worst-hit country in terms of case and death numbers, over 746,000 people have died of COVID-19. Which means we have now surpassed the number of people in the U.S. who have died of HIV-related illness. Rob Bishiza over at Boing Boing, who pointed this out, acknowledges that the data for the comparison is a little imprecise, but that it's also important to remember, quote, COVID took only 2 years to kill as many people in America as AIDS has in 40. End quote. Which is not to downplay the impact of HIV/AIDS whatsoever, rather to underscore the fact that we still have 2 ongoing epidemics, and that one of them has been around for 4 decades now. And while there's hope on the horizon, it took far too long to get here. So we must remain vigilant when it comes to both, and I hope very much that we continue to see good news about treatments and vaccines. So this is a pretty cool thing. A Wampanoag woman named Danielle Hill has grown heirloom corn on its native land for the first time in over 3 centuries. The Cape Coast and Islands NPR affiliate station in Massachusetts shared the story of how Hill was approached by a company called True Love Seeds about planting these corn seeds that the company themselves had been gifted. One of True Love Seeds' goals is to reconnect indigenous communities with their heirloom seeds, Hill told WCAI. The seeds in question are for a type of corn called King Philip corn, which is thin and copper-colored, about 8 inches long. Quoting WCAI, King Philip is a traditional Wampanoag flint corn. The name comes from a war fought from 1675 to 1676 between Wampanoag leader Metacom, also known as King Philip, and Puritan colonists. Over the course of the war, the colonists raided 1,000 acres of Wampanoag crops. End quote. The corn seeds today come from strains that colonizers salvaged after they destroyed the crops and continued to grow them themselves. Quoting True Love Seeds, beginning in 1817, John Brown of Long Island began selecting this variety for longer ears of a uniform size with small bud ends and producing at least 2 cobs per plant. The corn was soon grown throughout New England, the northern states, and lower Canada with names John Brown's corn or Improved King Philip corn. Our seed comes from William Woys Weaver, who notes that this strain from his Rough Wood seed collection predates Brown's improvements. This may account for some variation in cob length, shape, and color. end quote. And the Slow Food Foundation for Biodiversity notes that while King Philip corn is resistant to mold, it would not do well with petroleum-based fertilizers like those used in conventional agriculture these days. It also doesn't yield nearly as many ears of corn as modern hybrids, despite being viewed as very productive back in the 19th century. And as such, the corn is rarely grown and considered endangered. True Love Seeds is the only place where you can buy seeds for King Philip's corn, and a portion of every sale goes to indigenous seed sovereignty projects, like their partnership with Daniel Hill to plant the corn on the Wampanoag land where it was grown 340 years ago. So back in May, under a new moon, Hill and other tribal members held a planting ceremony and planted 200 mounds of the corn, alongside its two sisters, squash and beans. Hill was nervous about accidental cross-pollination and says she was surprised how invested she became in it, how much a sense of responsibility and nurturing she felt, especially as a non-farmer. But it all worked out in the end. She had plenty of corn and was able to send some seeds back to True Love Seeds to keep the King Philip corn going. Hill told WCAI that she hopes to be able to grow enough seeds to keep this descendant of King Philip's corn growing on Wampanoag land for many years to come. Well, a bit of a roundup of COVID-related news before I go. Tonga has just recorded its first ever COVID case. In just days of the first case being announced, the 1,000 resident nation's vaccine rate jumped from 35% to 62%. The main island of Tongatapu has gone into lockdown, and many people in other locations are voluntarily staying home to avoid risk. The positive case came from a Tongan missionary returning home from Australia, and all other passengers and crew on that flight have been quarantined. Meanwhile, in an extreme example of China's quest for COVID-0, 34,000 visitors to Shanghai Disneyland were kept in the park until every single one of them could be tested for COVID. They were then sent home at close to midnight on special buses and instructed to isolate for 2 days. Not a single one of them tested positive. The cause of the testing came as a woman traveled to Shanghai from nearby Hangzhou over the weekend. It's believed that she was at Disneyland, hence the testing, but officials haven't actually confirmed that she was even there. And in a sign of the times, the Oxford English Dictionary has declared vax the word of the year. OED senior editor Fiona McPherson said the word has made the most striking impact, and that it was also chosen for its versatility in the ways that people are using it to create other words and terms. McPherson notes that the word goes back to the 1980s, but was rarely used until this year. Meanwhile, the word pandemic increased an astonishing 57,000% this year, according to the BBC. Dang. But that is it from me for today. As always, this show was produced by Ride Home Media and Kottke.org. I am Jackson Bird, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.